Hello, my name is Mathias, and welcome to the Gameweek 8.5 edition of the FPL Scope Podcast, I guess. I'm your only host today because Kevin and I couldn't work out a proper time schedule or time frame to do the podcast this week. He was busy on the Wednesday when we usually film. I'm sort of busy Thursday night when we were supposed to film instead. So instead, I'm just going to do this podcast by myself today, but that's not really that big of a deal because we are not going into Game Week 9 this weekend because we are in the middle of an international break. So Game Week 9 is going to happen not now, this weekend, but a week after. So before the Game Week 9, basically deadline, Kevin and I will do the part 2, I guess, of this podcast, which will be with him as well. So yeah, looking forward to that. Looking forward to talk more about what's going to happen in Game Week 9. But in this part of the podcast, I guess we're going to talk more about what happened in Game Week 8 and specifically what happened more at the start of the season and maybe look at some potential lessons that I've learned throughout the first 8 game weeks of the season, because we're pretty far into the season now. Can't really do the quick maths in my head to work out how much of the season we played. I think it's about 25%-ish, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, there are a lot of things to learn. And yeah, we can also look back at what has gone right, what has gone wrong. And basically just talk about what has happened this season so far and yeah, how we're going to do for the rest of the season as well. And yeah, things we could learn from the first part of the season. But yeah, either way, that was the introduction, kind of all over the place, but I'm by myself. I don't have anyone to lean on, so I have to babble on by myself, I guess, and yeah, take it as we come. But what's really easy to do is just to look at this past game week for Kevin, who is obviously my co-host on this podcast. He decided to use his free hit this game week, and that was mainly due to his team just having no players available, really. Saka was not playing. His whole bench was out. He had a couple of players injured on the bench as well. I don't think he'd even start with 10 players. I think he'd have like 9 or 10 players if he started the game week with the same team that he ended game week 7 with. But the other part of the reason why he used the free hit was that he didn't have a single Tottenham player at all. And with the free hit, he was able to triple up on Spurs, but sadly for him, it didn't really work out that well. I mean, it worked out pretty well because he had Pedro Porro for 6 points and Maddison for 6 points. Maddison got an assist, Pedro Porro got a clean sheet. Pedro Porro probably should have scored a goal as well, though. Just kind of a letdown for those of us to have him in our fantasy teams. But the biggest letdown for Kevin this game week was his captaincy choice, which was Heung-min Son rather than going with Salah. He has Salah as vice captain. Salah got 15 points. Amazing. Well done for Kevin to just have Salah in the first place. He's had Salah the whole season. And yeah, it must kind of, I wish he was here to talk about this, but it must kind of hurt that Salah sort of hurt him in the rankings after he had put so much faith in him for the start of the season, when no other content creators have gone away from Salah and said that Salah isn't that good of value, and then brought him in on a wildcard in either Game Week 7 or Game Week 8, and now captained him for more points than Kevin got from him. So that has to sting a little bit, but all in all, the free hits ended up being okay for Kevin, but it's mostly down to the players that he already had, like Trippier and Salah. The one thing that was a mistake, I guess, with Kevin's team is the fact that he kept faith in Bruno Fernandes for another game week. He had Bruno Fernandes in his original team. He kept faith in him for the free hit team as well, because he had a pretty easy game against Brentford at home, where you'd expect him to potentially get some points, but he blanked, got 2 points, didn't really do much in the end. It was Scott McTominay who scored 2 goals and got the major haul. But also on his original team, Kevin had Raheem Sterling, who got the 16 points and who is featured on the thumbnail for this video as well on YouTube. So yeah, if he had kept faith in Sterling rather than Bruno Fernandes for this game week, he would have been so much better off. But sadly for Kevin, he sort of missed on that one. He did take some brave decisions though, because yeah, on a free hit, you kind of want to differentiate yourself from the rest of the teams. And he saw an opportunity to not have the City attackers that most of us have in Haaland and Alvarez. He swapped out Haaland and Alvarez and thinking that they'd have a tough game against Arsenal, and that was correct. They got 2 points each, which is not good if you want to have them on a free hit. But he did replace them with Darwin and Højlund, and that could have worked out. I was a pretty big fan of both of these players going into the game week. But Darwin only got 1 assist against Brighton, 5 points for him, and Højlund blanked against Brentford, got only 2 points. I think Højlund has looked really good so far this season, and he was really good in the Champions League as well. I think that's why both Kevin and I were pretty high on having him for this game week. I didn't have him personally because I didn't use my free hit, but I think it was a good decision for Kevin to bring in Højlund. But doubling up with Bruno Fernandes, maybe not the correct decision, but at the same time, it's easy to say in hindsight. I always tell Kevin that he is one of the like biggest hindsight merchants, where he just always says like, oh, I was going to have him, I should have had him, or whatever. But yeah, it's easy to judge in hindsight rather than actually judging it before the game happened. So I actually quite liked Kevin's free hit team. I think the punt on all the Liverpool players was the correct decision. I think Trent Alexander-Arnold could have had more points as well. But Brighton actually looked more impressive than they have been the last few game weeks, so it didn't really work out in the end. But at the same time, got some decent points. Trippier is the one that I probably wouldn't have on my own free hit, because he was playing against West Ham, which is my personal favorite team, so I didn't really back him to get any points. But at the same time, he did get the assist and actually got the 6 points, which helped Kevin in the standings as well. So yeah, Trippier was good, Salah was good, but not the captain, sadly, for Kevin. And Darwin brought 5 points to the table as well. Porro with 6 points, and that ended up with 53 points in total for Kevin. Not the best game week. You sort of want to get more when you use your free hits, but at the same time, you can understand why Kevin did the decisions that he did. Having triple Spurs was vital this game week, and that's why he used the free hit, because he wanted to have as many Spurs assets as possible. And it looked like a really good decision for the first 15 minutes. Especially because Spurs were creating so many chances, and like I said, Pedro Porro should have scored. That was from a Son assist. That would have helped Son get an assist early on in the game. And even if Spurs had scored in those opening minutes, the game could have been easily another 4-0, 5-0 type of win for Spurs, and that would have made it so much better for Kevin to bring in the 3 Spurs players when he didn't have any from beforehand. So yeah, it's down to variance, as we always or often talk about in FPL. Kind of lucky there for Kevin to not get more points from the Spurs assets, which was the main reason he free hitted. But at the same time, that's just what happens sometimes in FPL. You just gotta get back on the horse and try to find the new solutions for the next upcoming game weeks. And we're going to talk with Kevin about that next week on the podcast, and talk to Kevin about what he's going to do with his team. Take a look at if he actually has a chance to have more playing players this time around. I think he has a couple of players coming back from injury. For example, Saka, I think, is going to be fit and healthy probably for Game Week 9. So his team for Game Week 9 doesn't look too bad, but we're going to talk more about that in the next podcast when Kevin is around as well. So let's move on to another founding member of the FPL Scope, and that is Kimo, who had this team playing. He actually made a wildcard, or used a wildcard in Game Week 8. So slightly different scenario to Kevin, because Kimo then has to plan for a team to last him for the next few game weeks rather than just this one particular game week. But it ended up being a better game week, this particular game week as well for Kimo, because he got 70 points in total. So he had Turner in goal, who finally got a clean sheet. Huge for all of us that have Turner in goal, and some of us I have Flecken, for example, who is now out for about a month, I think, with illness. So I really needed personally to have Turner have a good performance and start for the first and foremost. I wanted Turner to start, because if he had lost his place, I would have no goalkeeper. But him keeping a clean sheet and playing a decent game, he didn't have too many chances coming against him, or he didn't have to save too many shots. But at the same time, kept a clean sheet. It's pretty massive for those of us that don't have a second goalkeeper, or have someone like Areola who has a tougher game against Aston Villa next game week. So Turner got 6 points for Kimo. Trippier got the 6 points as well from the assist he had against West Ham. Matty Cash with only 2 points, but Matty Cash is also essential for the next 2 game weeks, and he easily could have had more points against Wolves as well. Had another decent chance at the start of the game. Pedro Porro with the 6 points, as we already talked about. Kimo has the same triple up on Spurs. Pedro Porro, Son as a vice captain, and then Maddison as well, who got 6 points. Diaby with 2 points. He's also another player like Cash that is sort of brought in more for the future rather than the now. So it makes sense that he blanked, especially seeing as he was coming off an injury before the game. So it makes sense that he didn't get that many points. He was subbed off after about 60 minutes. I think it's basically down to his injury, and they don't want to risk further injury to Diaby, and that's why they brought him off. Then we have Mohamed Salah, which is kind of the contentious issue between the three of us in our group chat on WhatsApp between Kimo, Kevin, and I. Because last game week, or before last game week, on the FPL Scope podcast for Game Week 8, Kevin and I were talking about Kimo's wildcard team, and that wildcard team did not have Salah in it at all. And this is because Kimo actually put out his wildcard team in the group chat beforehand, before the podcast as well. And at that point, he was going without Salah. At least that's what Kevin and I claim. Kimo now, afterwards, after getting the Salah points, is claiming that Salah was always on his mind, but that is bullshit, and I wish Kimo was here to back me up on this, because yeah. Either way, Kimo actually went from not having Salah in his squad for a week ago to having Salah in his squad, and then also captaining him over Son. which is sort of like, I don't blame him for changing his mind on that. I did the same. I had Son as the captain for most of the game week, or leading into Game Week 8, most of the lead up to the game week. And then I switched pretty much around like Thursday, Friday-ish. Because I just thought Brighton looked worse than before, and I wasn't 100% sure about Spurs against the low block that has been much talked about the last game week. So I ended up captaining Salah as well, but Keem also did after not having Salah on his wildcard a week ago. But that ended up being the correct decision. I think Salah was basically a must-have on a wildcard, and Keemo actually, to his credit, changed his mind. I think he claims it was price changes, which is why he had Jared Bowen in that place instead. But either way, he got Salah back in. The Egyptian has the Egyptian king in his team, and it worked out beautifully, 30 points. But Keemo could not dump the City forwards, or you could dump Alvarez, I guess, but Haaland especially is someone that you don't want to leave out of your team. I know some people have gone without him, and credit to them. He only got 2 points this game week, so maybe it's going to work out. But yeah, Keemo had to have both Haaland and Alvarez. Those are really good options still going forward. But in this game, they struggled because they played Arsenal, a really boring game, really defensive game, and neither player really looked close to scoring at all. So 2 points for both of those guys. But then another cheeky pick from Keemo, that is Lyle Foster from Burnley. Burnley actually have really good fixtures going forward, and Foster's only 5.0. So I think he's actually worth the upgrade from Archer, who's 4.6, because I think Burnley, even though they still are a really bad team and lost 4-1 against Chelsea in the end, they are a better team than Sheffield United. So I think Foster is going to get quite a bit more points than Archer. So I actually think Foster is a better cheap option in attack. So credit to Keemo for having Foster. The only thing is he's going to have to rotate between Foster and Chukwuemeka, who's on his bench, basically for that final spot, or play as with a 4-back line with Burn in defense, which, to be honest, could work out as well. But that's sort of the concessions or the things you have to do to fit in Salah, Haaland, Son, and Trippier in the same team. It's really difficult to fit all those guys in the same team without any part of your team taking damage from it. So yeah, that's something that Keemo had to do. And in this game week, it worked out. Foster got 5 points. And in the future as well, he looks like a pretty decent pick. Burnley have good fixtures, like I said. And Foster has shown to be the best attacking asset at Burnley as well. So for that price, he is a pretty good asset going forward. Then on the bench on his wildcard squad, Keemo has Areola, who only got 1 point this game week against Newcastle, which was expected. That's also why he benched him this game week. But Areola is going to have really good fixtures from game week 10 onwards, so that's a no-brainer on a wildcard, I think. Dan Burn is another player that looks really good, especially lately with his performance as of late. He could have scored against West Ham as well, had a pretty good chance against West Ham after scoring against PSG in the Champions League and scoring in the league against Sheffield United as well. Burn is looking like a better and better option, I think, in FPL, so that makes a lot of sense. Therefore, I mentioned Chukwuemeka as well. He is pretty much just like a cheap option that could potentially play a bit for Chelsea. Chelsea do have really tough fixtures coming up though, and Chukwuemeka is not really the most prolific FPL player either, so he's probably going to ride the bench mostly anyway. He got 0 points. He's still not back from injury, like just yet. I think he's close to getting back into fitness, but either way, not really the biggest FPL asset unless you need to save money and have someone for your bench, basically. And then finally, on his bench, he has Tariq Lamptey, who once again is injured and didn't play. Looked like maybe Lamptey could be a decent option with Estupiñán out with the injury for about a month, but Lamptey, in his own right, is struggling with injuries his whole career, and yeah, he's not really someone you can put faith in either. So all in all, I think Keemo's wildcard team is looking really good. He has all the essential parts, I think. I can't really fault anything with it. Personally, we had an argument, Keemo and I, about this, but personally, I don't think Trippier is essential going forward, especially for his price. I think you can downgrade Trippier to upgrade someone like Foster or Chukwuemeka to a better asset, because you can find really good defenders at 4.5 and 5.0. But you cannot really find the same for attackers. Like Chukwuemeka and Foster are like decent options, but not the best. So yeah, but at the same time, Trippier has been so good for Keemo, has brought him so many points, so I understand the loyalty to him. I don't have Trippier, and that has been like one of the biggest downsides to my season so far. The fact that Trippier has gotten now like 38 points in the last 4 game weeks or 3 game weeks or whatever it is. Trippier has been playing out of his mind lately and getting a lot of assists. I think kind of luckily he's been getting so many assists, but Trippier is a fantastic player and could get an assist and could get a clean sheet in any particular game week. So he's still a pretty decent option, even for the price that he is now. He's up to 6.9, I think, now in terms of price. So really expensive, but obviously a really good asset in defense as well. So all in all, I really rate Chemo's wildcard team. I think the Foster punt is looking pretty good as well. Personally, I might have gone for like a super cheap forward, like for example Mubama from West Ham, who doesn't play but he's 4.3, or someone like Ozula who's 4.4, and maybe use the money on a midfielder, because I think there are better midfielders for the 5.0 price range than there are attackers. So maybe I would go with someone like Souček, who's 4.9, or someone like Cole Palmer, who's now on penalties. But obviously, Chemo couldn't know that Palmer would be on penalties before the game week, so I don't really begrudge him for that decision at this point. But yeah, having someone like Cole Palmer and having a lesser attacker, I think would be a better option currently if you would have to use, or if you could use hindsight to choose the team again. But yeah, either way, pretty good wildcard team and a really good score for Chemo, who's now ahead of me in the table. So yeah, I'm going to have to try to catch him again, but feeling pretty confident, especially with someone who has the wildcard still left in his pocket. I think I have a decent chance to overtake Chemo, but his team is undoubtedly looking really, really good going forward. So yeah, can't really fault his team at all. Moving on to the manager of the week, and like David Large, who is the manager of the week this week. Anyone of you guys who are either watching or listening to this now can join the FPL Scope Mini League and become the manager of the week if you score the highest amount of points in one particular game week. David Large had the biggest score in game week 8 among the FPL Scope league. He ended up with 81 points. He did use 2 transfers though and did a -4, so technically he only got 77 points, I should say, in quotation marks, but 81 points in total in terms of the players that brought in points. Really good gaming for him. But yeah, like I said, you can join the FPL Scope Mini League and be the manager of the week yourself, and the Mini League code is V9JT0D. So please join the league and join about 200 other people, I think, in the league, and try to become the manager of the week like David Large. But yeah, speaking of his team, the best differentials that this manager of the week has is obviously Salah as captain. That was the main part. 15 points times 2, that's 30 points for Salah. Huge for anyone trying to be the manager of the week this week. But on top of that, David Large actually had Sterling as well with his 16 points. And it was really interesting looking at this guy's previous game weeks as well, because he actually used his wildcard in game week 3, as you can see on your screen here. And he brought in Sterling for that game week 3, when he scored 19 points against Luton. And prior to that, Sterling had just blanked in the 2 first game weeks of the season. So really good shout to have Sterling there, and really good shout to just keep faith in Sterling as well, maybe backed by that 19-point performance. Personally, speaking as someone who had Sterling after that Luton performance and then sold him before this performance, I only had 3 or 4 game weeks of blanks from Sterling. Maybe the fact that he got that first big haul is the reason that he had a little bit more faith in Sterling for the long haul than I did, because I sold Sterling just to get Heung-min Son basically, and it backfired because Sterling got more points than Son was ever close to getting. But yeah, Sterling, a really good differential. And then the final really good player that I wish I had in my own team as well is Sam Johnston in the Crystal Palace goal. He got 9 points. I think he got a save point and 2 bonus points and a clean sheet as well. Johnston has been the highest scoring goalkeeper so far, is looking like the best goalkeeper. He was my second choice sort of goalkeeper at the start of the season in Game Week 1. I went with Andre Onana instead, which has been a major mistake. Onana has been terrible so far this season, so yeah, that has really backfired. And the whole Sterling situation as well, I'll get more into, and how I got Sterling in the first place, I'll get more into when I talk about my own team in the team selection video next week. But either way, Sterling, Johnston, and Salah were the main point contributors to this team. This team also has Trippier with 6 points and Udogie with 6 points as well, so clean sheets for those guys. The rest of the team blanked, but that doesn't really matter. 81 points, -4. Really good game week, and a really good team, to be fair, going forward as well, especially for someone that wildcarded in game week 3 when like Chelsea and Brentford were the main teams to have. I think this guy has basically managed to turn his team into a really good working team as well, because he has brought in Salah eventually. He has brought in Salah eventually, I think it was that, or he brought in Sterling, but either way, he got that money from downgrading players like Chilwell down to Kabore, and a striker, I can't remember which striker he had, maybe Nick Jackson to Morris. Downgraded those guys so he could have more money to have. It was either Trippier or Salah they could bring in with that money. So well done punting on the Luton guys for the double game week, and that gave him enough money to have a really strong team from game week 8 onwards, where he doesn't really need his wildcard now, where many other players are using their wildcard in either game week 8 or potentially game week 10. This guy doesn't really need it because his team is pretty well set up for the future. And we'll discuss that more in the next podcast with Kevin as well next week, because that's when we're going to take a look at the teams going forward for Game Week 9 and potentially a little bit beyond that as well. So either way, really good match of the week score for, or manager of the week score for David Large. Congratulations to him. He's second in the mini league as well, I think, in total. So really good season in general. Nice to have those 2 Sterling hauls. I'm really jealous as someone that only got blanks from Sterling, as I always do, because Sterling is a big troll for me. But either way, congratulations for the Sterling points. Congratulations for being manager of the week. And like I said, any of you guys can join the mini league as well and become the manager of the week for Game Week 9 or Game Week 10 or any other game weeks leading up to the end of the season in Game Week 38, because we're going to keep this podcast and this show, the FPL Scope, running at least until the end of the season and until the start of the next season as well. But yeah, I'll get more into that at a different time. But either way, that is the manager of the week, and let's move on to the next part of the schedule, and that is looking at the result predictions that Kevin and I do each and every week. We try to predict the scores, and we talk a little bit about each game, both in after the game has happened, we talk about what happened, and then we also take a look at the future in terms of what we predict for the scores in Game Week 9. But we're going to do that on the podcast next week, so I'm just going to take a look at the results from this week in this podcast. So first up, we have the Luton against Spurs fixture. We both had a pretty decisive win for Spurs. I had 3-0 for Spurs. He had 3-1. Both ended up having the correct result and not the correct scoreline. So yeah, 1 point for each there. Burnley-Chelsea, we both went with a Chelsea win. I had 2-1 for Chelsea, Kevin had 3-1 for Chelsea, and I did 4-1 for Chelsea, so both of us got the correct result in that one as well, but no correct scoreline. Everton against Bournemouth, I had 2-0 for Everton, Kevin had 3-1 for Everton, and Everton ended up winning 3-0, so again, we're pretty close, but we're not exactly there when it comes to the scoreline, but at least we got the result right. When it comes to Fulham against Sheffield United, we both got the result wrong, because we both had 1-1 between Fulham and Sheffield United. Fulham ended up being the better team, as we probably should have expected before the game week. Fulham, for all its faults, still have a better team than Sheffield United, and they were playing at home, so we really should have seen this home win coming. But at the same time, both those teams are pretty bad, so 1-1 wouldn't be the worst result in the world. And at some point in the game, it was 1-1 as well, but Fulham managed to eke out the 3-1 win in the end. Quite deservedly so, to be fair, but yeah. Next up, we had Man United against Brentford, and that is a result that I got, completely wrong, I should say, because I had it 2-2, ending as a draw, so I got 0 points in terms of the results, no points in terms of scoreline. But Kevin got it correctly on the dot, 2-1 to Man United, which is, I guess, it is correct to give Kevin some credit, but at the same time, it also was left really late. Easily could have been 1-1, easily could have been 1-0 to Brentford as well, so this game was really open-ended, but Kevin ended up getting the correct result in the end either way. But I struck back with the correct result in the Crystal Palace Nottingham Forest game, where I predicted correctly 0-0, because I couldn't really see Palace scoring, but I couldn't really see Palace conceding either. So that's why I predicted 0-0, and that's what the game ended. Kevin had it as 1-1, so he did get the correct result, but he did not have the correct scoreline. Then we have the Sunday games, and this is where I sort of caught up a little bit with Kevin, because he had every single game incorrectly. And the first game we both had incorrect. That was Brighton against Liverpool. We both expected Liverpool to win, but it ended up being 2-2. Pretty even game, all things considered. Both teams were kind of struggling a bit after playing in the Europa League on the Thursday, so they were lacking defensively at some points. Made some really silly mistakes to concede, so we both got this result wrong. We both expected Liverpool to look a bit better than Brighton, because that's what they have looked like lately. But Brighton, to De Zerbi's credit, he changed his tactics to suit the game against Liverpool better, and you should never really count Brighton out, because De Zerbi is such an amazing manager, and they do have a lot of good talents in the squad, even if they have some injuries to key players. But yeah, it ended up being 2-2 when both of us had a Liverpool win. Then West Ham against Newcastle, I actually backed my boys West Ham in this game and thought we could get a point, and that's exactly what we got. The game ended up being 2-2. I predicted 1-1, so I got the correct result at least. Kevin actually predicted the 3-1 Newcastle win, and yeah. Could have happened, I guess, because Newcastle took the lead 2-1 and was really close to scoring 3-1 as well. But at the same time, West Ham, I think, deservedly got a point from this fixture, because I think, as the unbiased West Ham fan that I am, I think the referee was sort of giving Newcastle some dubious calls that should have been the other way, or should have been corrected, I think. Namely, Bruno Guimaraes should have had his second yellow card, should have been sent off pretty early in the game. And Newcastle as well had some dubious-ish goals as well, I guess you could say. But either way, 1-1, really strong result for West Ham. To be honest, a really strong result for Newcastle as well, because West Ham away is a pretty difficult fixture. That ended up being 2-2 rather than 1-1, so I only got 1 point from the correct result in that game rather than getting the correct scoreline. Then Wolverhampton against Aston Villa. We both expected Aston Villa to win. Kevin had a 2-1 Aston Villa win. I had 3-1 for Aston Villa, but this ended up being a surprising draw. And I guess maybe not so surprising anymore, because Wolves have looked pretty good this season. And they just beat Man City the game week prior as well, so maybe we shouldn't really count Wolves as one of the bad teams in the league anymore. They've certainly impressed me a little bit, and especially Pedro Neto, who looks fantastic, especially as an FPL pick as well. I'm pretty tempted to have Pedro Neto as well, but it's just the fact that I really want so many midfielders, so I might not take a punt on someone who plays for a supposedly bad team. But Wolves, maybe they're not so bad. Maybe Pedro Neto is actually a really safe pick now, because they do have 3 really easy fixtures in the next 5 against really weak opponents. So yeah, Pedro Neto is definitely someone to keep note of. He was the architect for the first goal, but then Aston Villa struck back and got the equalizer pretty soon after. Aston Villa were also really close to scoring as well after that. I think they probably should have had a penalty when Watkins was pushed in the back earlier in the game, and they also were really close to scoring right at the death when Ollie Watkins got across and headed it onto the post and out. If he had scored that, it would have been 2-1. It would have gone from an incorrect scoreline and incorrect result for Kevin to be a correct scoreline and correct result for Kevin. So those are the fine margins that we play with when we do the prediction game in this thing. But then the final game where I also got a little point was Arsenal against Man City. I had a 2-1 Arsenal win. Kevin had a 2-1 Man City win. And that ended up being 1-0 to Arsenal, like we all saw. Pretty boring and defensive game. Probably could have seen that coming as well. But yeah, I take the correct result in that game and run with it, because it means I had 6 correct results this game week and Kevin only had 5. So I actually slightly catch up a little bit with him, because now I have 35 correct results this season compared to Kevin's 44. So I'm still 9 correct results behind and still trying to work my way back from this. But yeah, slowly but surely I can make up the deficit. If I keep taking one result or getting one result more correct than him each week, I'll end up beating him quite handedly in the end. So I'll take that in any week. When it comes to the scorelines, we both have 1 each this game week. Takes the season total up to 3 correct scorelines for me and 5 correct scorelines for Kevin. Considering we've had 80 games, that's pretty disappointing that we only have 8 put together. So that's 160 attempts to get 3 points or 3 correct scorelines for me and 5 correct scorelines for Kevin. But we've been really close, as you see with some of these fixtures. Like the Chelsea game could easily end up 3-1 or 2-1. Spurs could easily beaten Luton 3-1 as well. Bournemouth against Everton, we both were really close. I had Everton scoring twice and not conceding. He had Everton scoring 3, which they did, and conceding. So we were both right, sorta. But yeah, either way, that is basically the predictions for the past game week, and that's part of the game for the predictions as well. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the predictions. We're not going to talk about the future predictions yet, because I'm going to discuss that with Kevin on the podcast next week, but stay tuned for that. Subscribe if you haven't already. Be very much appreciated if you did. And please comment down below if you have any comments about the podcast or anything in general in terms of the FPL Scope, or what you want your own team rated or anything like that. I respond to most comments. I think I'm sometimes I forget to respond, but either way, I respond to most comments. I'm going to try to respond to every single comment from now on. So any comment, it would be much appreciated as well. Finally, in this podcast, or I should say, it's not completely finally, because I'm going to talk a little bit about some closing thoughts as well at the end, but the final main talking point of this podcast as well is just looking at the fixture ticker and looking at which teams have the best fixtures going forward. And the team at the top is actually Man United. They have really good fixtures, which is super annoying for anyone that has Rashford and Bruno Fernandes still, because at this point you just really want to get rid of both, if at least one, but maybe both of them, because you're so sick and tired of seeing them blanking each and every week. But I don't know. That's one of the lessons I'm going to talk about, like selling players before a really easy fixture, regardless of how poor form the team has been currently. It's probably not the best idea. I think I landed on this by now. I think in the previous video that I made, I sort of made the suggestion that maybe you should sell Rashford or Fernandes this game week, but I think you can give them one more game week for the Sheffield United fixture, and then you can just sell them in game week 10, whether it's on the wildcard or anything like that. But But yeah, Sheffield United away should be a really good fixture for them. Then they have Man City in Game Week 10, which is not good. But after that, they have Fulham away, Luton at home, and Everton away. 3 pretty good fixtures on paper. Maybe Everton away shouldn't be considered that easy, because Everton actually have some pretty good expected goal numbers. If you look at the stats here on the table that I have here, if you look at Everton in the last six games that they've played, or the last 6 matches that they played, their XG is 11.57 and their expected goals conceded is 5.91. So they've actually created a lot more chances than the chances they have conceded. So in terms of underlying numbers, Everton have actually been a really good team so far this season. So yeah, the numbers like compare pretty handsomely or pretty decently to like some of the best performing sides. Like the top 3 is Newcastle with 13.78 expected goals in the last 6. Also something that should be talked about more. Newcastle have a really good attack. I know a lot of people are invested in Newcastle defense, but offensively, Newcastle have some really good players, and they have some decent fixtures as well coming up. So yeah, someone like Alexander Isak, for example, maybe you should consider him. I know he is still in that rotation with Wilson. It's always difficult to choose between them, but you could take a punt on him if you want to make up some ground in terms of the points, because Isak can score in pretty much any game week. He can get a double-digit haul in any game week as well. So I think he's a pretty good option. And then Anthony Gordon, of course, who's sort of forgotten a little bit about last game week because he was suspended against West Ham. But now that he's back with these fixtures and with Harvey Barnes injured for the foreseeable future, he's also probably a good pick. But going back to what I was talking about, expected goals, Newcastle top with 13.78. The second best team for expected goals is Liverpool with 12.56. Another reason why you should have Salah, especially for these 4 upcoming fixtures: Everton at home, Nottingham Forest at home, Luton away, and Brentford at home. 3 home games against pretty easy opposition, and then the Luton away fixture, which is also pretty good when it comes to just fixture difficulty. So yeah, Liverpool definitely a team to look at as well. And then third on the expected goal chart is also the one of the favorites to win the league, and that is Arsenal with 12.35. They also have some really enticing fixtures, especially in Game Week 10 and Game Week 12. Sheffield United at home in Game Week 10, Burnley at home in Game Week 12. Should be massive points potential for attackers. I know a lot of people are without Arsenal attackers at the moment. People have sold Saka, people have sold Martinelli a while ago, but both those guys look fantastic going forward. So I think definitely those guys should be your priority. I think if you have someone like Maddison, or especially if you have both Son and Maddison, it's pretty easy to downgrade one of those guys to either Saka or Martinelli for Game Week 10 or Game Week 12. Because you look at Spurs' fixtures, they are second highest on this list, but in terms of like offensive output, I don't think they have the easiest matches. Obviously, Game Week 9 against Fulham at home, that is a really good fixture in terms of attacking points. But Game Week 10, it is sort of an easy fixture because they play against Crystal Palace. You don't really have anything to go with going forward. They don't have any really good attackers currently, with Eze injured as well, and Olise is still out with injury. So defensively, I think that's a good fixture for Tottenham, for those of you guys with Pedro Porro and Udogie, like I have. But offensively, Crystal Palace have been really good defensively, so I think the Spurs assets could struggle a bit in that match. And likewise with the Game Week 11 against Chelsea. Chelsea are also one of the best performing teams when it comes to expected goals conceded. Only 5.14 expected goals conceded in the last 6 game weeks. So I think Chelsea are actually a pretty good defensive team. They face Spurs in Game Week 11. Then Game Week 12, we have Wolves away, and that has proven to be a really tough fixture for like the biggest teams. Wolves should have beaten Man United in the first match of the season. They did beat Man City in Game Week 7, and they also gave Liverpool a really tough game when they played them. So that's not really an easy fixture either for the Spurs attackers. And then finally, they have Aston Villa at home, which also could be good offensively. But at the same time, Aston Villa are a team that could beat anyone because they have a really good squad. So they do have good fixture, Spurs, especially defensively, because most of those teams, Crystal Palace, Fulham, Chelsea, they're not really, and Wolverhampton especially as well, they don't really have the most clinical finishers. Maybe Wolves now with Hwang Hee-chan, who's been playing out of his skin lately. But defensively, I think the Spurs fixtures are really good, but offensively, not so good after the Fulham game in Game Week 9. So my original point was, if you have especially both Son and Maddison, I think you can swap one of them to an Arsenal attacker in Game Week 10, potentially even captain them if you get Saka, or if you get Martinelli as well. Martinelli would be a really fun differential captaincy pick in Game Week 10, I think. So yeah, you could definitely consider that. When it comes to the best teams in terms of the expected goals conceded, we also have 2 repeat offenders, and that is Arsenal, who are actually the best team when it comes to expected goals conceded, 4.44. Really good number there in the last 6 matches. And that bodes well for the likes of Gabriel Magalhaes in defense, who is also someone with really good goal threat, especially in Game Week 10 against Sheffield United. Like I mentioned, Sheffield United are the worst team when it comes to conceding set pieces, as we saw when Newcastle beat them and their centre-back scoring goals. So I think that could also be a massive haul game for Gabriel. So I think he is definitely someone on my radar for Game Week 10 as well. But yeah, that's Arsenal with the best expected goals conceded. Then in second place when it comes to expected goals conceded, we have Man City, who always do really well in this category. They don't really get many goals conceded or expected goals conceded, but they do usually concede one goal, stupidly, sadly for them. And they also have some tough-ish matches, especially defensively. Brighton is a team that could score against anyone and have scored in pretty much every game so far this season, I think. Man United away. It is a derby, and anything can happen. Man City are obviously hugely favored in that match, but at the same time, Man United tend to score against Man City, so that's also defensively not the best fixture. Bournemouth at home is a pretty good fixture all around, and I think that is the game where most of us are going to captain Hall on. Potentially captain Salah when he plays against Luton, but either way. When it comes to attacking assets, I think Man City have really good fixtures in the next 4 or next 3 at least. But yeah, Game Week 12, they play Chelsea away, which is, like I said, not the easiest fixture for attackers, but defensively could be a good fixture if you have a City defender. You should also note that John Stones is back from injury now. I think he's 5.2 in Fantasy Premier League, so I think he's a really good differential pick eventually. Potentially even in these tougher matches when people don't really expect much from him, but you got to see him be back in full fitness first and see him sort of play semi-regularly, I think, before you bring him in. But I think he's also a sneaky pick to have in FPL, especially from that Game Week 11 fixture against Bournemouth at home. So yeah, City are a decent defensive side, but not the best fixtures, I guess. But still a team that you could back. But speaking of being a good defensive side and having bad fixtures, you have Chelsea, who are at the bottom of the fixture ticker with really tough matches. But they've actually been the third best defense in terms of expected goals conceded the last 6 matches, with 5.14 expecting goals conceded, which is really, really good. But at the same time, Chelsea defenders, I mean, you could go with someone like Colwill, you could go with Disasi, I guess, has had some attacking threats this season. Maybe Sanchez in goal if you want to go with him. But at the same time, I don't know, I would not buy Chelsea players at this moment in time. Maybe if you have a Chelsea player, if you have someone like Sterling, I think you can make a case for keeping him for the next 2 game weeks. Arsenal at home, again, it is a derby, London derby. Anything can happen in that game, even though Arsenal kind of handedly beat Chelsea last time around in the London derby. And then you also have another London derby, I guess, with Brentford in Game Week 10. Brentford at home. So the next 2 fixtures, I think it's fine to hold Chelsea assets, but I would not try to buy Chelsea assets because, as you can see from Game Week 11 and Game Week 12, they have Spurs away in Game Week 11, Man City at home in Game Week 12, really tough fixture there, and then Newcastle away in Game Week 13. So really awful matches for Chelsea all around. So yeah, mostly you should sell your Chelsea assets, but maybe you can make a case for keeping them for Game Week 9 and Game Week 10. And that's pretty much just what I can read from the fixture ticker as of right now. The other top teams in the table are, well, Man United I mentioned, Spurs as number 2 I also mentioned. Number 3 on the fixture ticker table is Wolverhampton, and like I said earlier, Pedro Neto might be a really good pick for you going forward, because you can see Game Week 9, Game Week 11 and Game Week 13. They have Bournemouth away, Sheffield United away and Fulham away. They're all away fixtures, which is kind of the downside here, but Bournemouth, Sheffield United and Fulham are potentially the 3 teams, maybe including Burnley and Luton. Basically the teams that you want to target or have players playing against. So I think Pedro Neto could be a really good pick in the future game weeks, especially if you have someone that could rotate well with them. If you have someone like Diaby, who has really strong fixtures in Game Week 10 and Game Week 12, if those are the guys you're rotating, Diaby and Neto, then, or Diaby and Watkins for that, or no, I mean Neto and Watkins for that matter, then that could work out really, really well as well. So yeah, you just have to look at your team and look at how it suits your rotation and what you can do. But Pedro Neto is definitely someone that I would consider for sure, looking at these fixtures. At the bottom of the table, though, we have Chelsea, like we mentioned. I just talked about them, don't really have to mention them. Fulham are the second from bottom in this table, and I don't really know why you would have a Fulham player in the first place, so don't buy them. Everton have posted some really good numbers, and I would be sort of tempted to have Everton players in general, but they don't have the best fixtures, and looking at their fixture ticker in terms of the game weeks after Game Week 13 as well, for some reason their fixtures just never really turn properly. Like they never have like a run of 4 or 5 good fixtures in a row, it seems like, until like Game Week 34, which is kind of crazy. So yeah, for Everton, I'd probably just recommend someone like Jared Branthwaite, 4.0 defender, who's going to be pretty nailed going forward. He's someone you could potentially have on a wildcard. Someone you could buy if you want to downgrade a player in defense to have a cheaper player and free up some funds. But other than that, I don't really think there are any Everton players you should look into. But I know just finally one thing that you can talk about as well for the fixture checker is that I know Game Week 10 is a really popular game week for people to wildcard. And if you're a wildcard in Game Week 10, I think one of the fun things about using your wildcard is the fact that you can buy a player for a single game week and then just wildcard them out again. And if you just take a look at the Game Week 9 fixtures, obviously you have the top teams, like I mentioned, Man United, Tottenham and Wolves, where they have really good fixtures. But you also have another team in Nottingham Forest playing Luton at home in Game Week 9. I think someone like Gibbs White is someone you should definitely consider if you are looking to wildcard in Game Week 10, because he plays Luton at home in Game Week 9. He looked pretty good again when he played against Crystal Palace. You're known from the past that he's been a really good asset in FPL. He takes free kicks, he is on penalties, and has that favorable fixture. So if you're looking for a 1 week punt in Game Week 9, I have mentioned Pedro Neto. I think he's still a really good 1 week punt, or if you want to keep him beyond that, he's someone you can go with. But also, like I mentioned, Gibbs White is another player you could bring in for that 1 game week and then wildcard him out, because they do have tougher fixtures after that. So I think that's something fun you should look into as well when it comes to targeting players before you do a wildcard. I think that's always a really fun strategy, and that's why I always think you should sort of know in advance when you're about to wildcard, because that gives you so much more flexibility for what you can do in the game weeks leading up to that, because the wildcard is such a massive chip you can use. So especially if you're using it in Game Week 10, you should definitely think about what you're doing in Game Week 9, because you could gain some points from doing a single transfer that benefits you in that game week in particular. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the podcast in terms of like the main talking points. Like I said at the start of the podcast, though, I just want to talk a little bit about the mistakes that I've done so far this season. I have mentioned a couple of them, like going with Onana rather than Johnson at the start of the season. I think in general, I think you should just go with a goalkeeper from a lesser team. I would not bring in a goalkeeper from a Big Six squad mostly, because first of all, they cost more usually. They cost either 5.0 or 4 or 5.5 even. But at the same time, you also block off an attacking asset potentially from that team. So let's say someone like David Raya. I think he is a really good goalkeeper. He could potentially be the best goalkeeper for the next like 10 game weeks, because Arsenal have a really good defense. And he's only 4.7, I think, or 4.8 in terms of price. So he's actually a decent price. He plays for a really defensive team. He plays for a really good team in general. I think they're going to keep a lot of clean sheets. He's going to get a lot of points. He is a pretty good like bonus magnet as well. But at the same time, that also blocks off the possibility of having 3 outfield players from Arsenal, which I think could be really beneficial going forward. So personally, I would rather have Gabriel rather than having David Raya, because I think the added goal threat it's worth the money by itself, worth the cash as it were. So yeah, I would rather have Gabriel than Raya. And then at the same time, if you have Raya and Gabriel, it is a viable strategy, because Arsenal will keep a lot of clean sheets. But at the same time, that blocks you off from having Martinelli and Saka, for example, or having Ødegaard and Saka, or Jesus and Saka, or Jesus and Ødegaard, or any which way you want to go with attacking Arsenal assets, which could be really good, especially in Game Week 10 and Game Week 12. So yeah, I think Raya is a good example to show that you shouldn't really go with any top 6 or Big 6 goalkeepers, because it blocks you off from having vital players in the outfield positions as well. So that's one of the lessons I've learned. That's also one of the considerations I had going into the season. I thought maybe I should just go with Johnson, because I can't really see a future where I want 3 Crystal Palace players. I could see a future, especially at the start of the season, where I wanted 3 Man United attacking players or outfield players, but that hasn't ended up being the case either. But yeah, either way, I had Onana for the first 2 game weeks and then sold him for Mark Flecken, who's been an utter disaster as well. That has been my biggest flaw so far this season, was my Game Week 4 transfers. I did a 4-point hit. That's up until this game week, it actually was my worst decision so far this season. But in Game Week 4, I took a 4-point hit to go from Onana to Flecken, which gave me enough cash to go from Eberechi Eze to Sterling after Sterling's major or massive 19-point haul against Luton. Sterling ended up blanking in the next 3 game weeks, and the player I sold to get Sterling was Eberechi Eze, who has, to be fair, struggled and been injured now the last 3 game weeks as well. But in the game week where I sold him, he actually got 9 points because he had a really good fixture at home to Wolverhampton. And I did sort of make the same mistake again for Game Week 8. I did a -4 hit to bring in Son and Diaby for Sterling and Foden. And that ended up costing me again because Sterling got 16 points, which was more than Son and Foden combined, times 2 as well. So yeah, I rushed to do both of those transfers, both in Game Week 4 to get Sterling and in Game Week 8 to essentially get Son. I rushed to make those transfers because I had the exact money and there were price changes that would lock me out of doing that move eventually. But both times it has actually backfired for me massively. So yeah, pretty unfortunate those 2 game weeks, but it also gives me something to remember for future game weeks. You shouldn't really sell players when you have a really good fixture in the next fixture. It's usually not worth it. To be fair, the reason that I did it for Son was because I was thinking I was going to captain Son. Didn't really have much time to decide. I had to mid game week 7. I had to sort of decide to get Son in as like the captain for game week 8. But in the end, I ended up going with a different captain in Salah, so I probably should have just stayed away from Son in general, or maybe gone with someone like Maddison instead, who's cheaper. The reason that I went with Son rather than Maddison is the fact that I could captain him pretty much. But now it doesn't look like I'm going to captain Son anytime soon. So yeah, that was a mistake. In general, that has been a mistake. So that's something that I would look to avoid. Looking at Kevin's decisions as well so far this season, he has sort of had the same issues that he usually has, and that's just being angry with the last game week and doing moves to get a better game week in the next game week. That led to him using the wildcard in game week. Was it game week 4? Game week, can't remember when he used the wildcard. Let's go back to the score. Game week 4 is when he used the wildcard. This was after a really disastrous game week where he was on vacation and didn't really have time to check his team. And yeah, he did his wildcard in game week 4, which was the worst time to use the wildcard because that was basically when Chelsea and Brentford players were the players with the most hype, and those teams have really struggled since then. So really bad luck for Kevin in terms of that. But he has actually recovered quite well and is not that far behind me in FPL, even though I had a pretty good season. So yeah, all in all, he's had a pretty good season as well. But I think you just shouldn't chase points from the last few game weeks. I know this is like pretty simple stuff. A lot of content creators have made the same point, but yeah, you can't really chase the points from last week. You have to just look into the future and see which players could be really good. The other mistake that I have done this season is not getting Trippier in for his really easy fixtures. And part of the reason that I didn't do that is because I looked too far into the future into deciding what I was going to do with my transfers. So back around like game week 5, game week 6, game week 7, I was looking into like my future plans, like what can I do in game week 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I went all the way to like game week 14 and thinking about like how I could potentially fit in Trent Alexander-Arnold if I do this move and this move and this move and save cash here and here and here and not have to spend the cash there. Like I went through all this thing just to basically plan for game week 14, which is so far into the future when so much new information has happened, so many injuries has happened, so many changes have happened in terms of FPL in general. So I was sort of blinded by that in terms of not getting players that are really good in the now, like Trippier, for example. If I wasn't so obsessed about basically saving the cash, then I probably would have gotten Trippier because I thought he was a really good player to have in those future game weeks. And I did say for anyone wildcarding game week 8 and game week 10, go for Trippier for now because you can wildcard him out again in game week 8 or game week 10 when their fixtures turn a bit more or don't turn as good as they were before. So I wish I hadn't planned too far in advance, but at the same time, the mistake I did last season when I started this podcast was that I looked too much into just the upcoming game week rather than looking at the next like 4 or 5 game weeks. So I think in general, you should just keep in mind that you should plan for the next like 3 to 5 game weeks. Try to take advantage of players with really good fixtures in those few game weeks, and especially if you have a wildcard in hand, like I do currently. Don't be afraid to take risks and maybe get too many players that you want to sell, because you can just use your wildcard at any point, and it's not that big of a deal if you use it in game week 10 when you potentially wanted to use it in game week 19, which I'm still currently looking to do. And that's always been my plan this season because I already had Salah, I already had a lot of players that I wanted. I figured that I don't really need to use the wildcard, but at the same time, I shouldn't really be too worried about my team. And if I have to use the wildcard in like game week 14, then I'll use the wildcard in game week 14. Maybe I'll actually bring in Trent Alexander-Arnold for those fixtures. I think that's when he has 3 really easy fixtures. But yeah. So yeah, don't plan too far in advance and don't look too much into the past few game weeks. Stay away from goalkeepers from the big 6 sides in general, and stay away from like early hits on like players due to price rises. Like usually it doesn't really matter. Like you don't really have to use all your budget all the time. I think it's sort of like I don't know. I guess you could say an error with our thinking that we always need to use the cash. There's probably some psychological sort of thing you can say for this, some kind of fallacy or whatever you can use for this. But either way, that's something that I can talk more about in future podcasts when my mind isn't as jumbled as it is now after talking about FPL for 50 minutes. Either way, let me just wrap up the podcast that I did all by myself. Looking forward to have Kevin back, because it's so nice to just ask him in the thing and just have a little break where I don't have to talk. Either way, stay tuned for the podcast with Kevin next week and all the content coming up next week. This has been the international break as well, so there has only been 2 videos this week, but next week we're going to be back to having 5 videos again throughout the week. Plenty to watch, plenty to listen to. So yeah, stay tuned for that. And with that, I just want to say thank you for watching. If you've been listening this whole time as well, thank you very much. I really appreciate all the support, all the comments as well, and on the YouTube channel as well. So yeah, thank you for all you guys for watching and stuff and listening. And until next time, see ya and goodbye.